podcast. I'm so excited that you are here. Today, I am interviewing Kimalee Finelli as she shares with us her book, Under Authority, based on the true events that happened in her own life. We are going to be talking about church hurt and church abuse and the grief that might come when you realize that you have to leave everything you've ever known, including your family, in order to become healthy and walk with the Lord. So I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you do, I'm really asking everyone who listens to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and leave us a review. Start a comment, start some conversation as well in the comment section. We really, really, really want this information and this content to really reach as many people as possible. I really truly believe that the information that we have here and the people that we interview here can help other people who are also grieving and going through a hard and difficult time. Really, we are trying to show them that God has not abandoned them. God is with them, and He grieves with them in their times of trial and trouble. Again, like and share and subscribe, and enjoy this episode with Kimalee Finelli.
Welcome to the Grieving with God podcast. I'm your host, Dawn Byington, and I'm so excited for you to be here today. We are starting a topic that we've never covered before, and that is spiritual abuse and church hurt. And so today I have with me Kimalee Finelli, and when we met at school, we realized we had a lot more in common than we thought. And Kimalee is the author of the book Under Authority, which is for sale now on Amazon. Kimalee, can you tell us just a little bit about your book?
Okay, well, Under Authority is Christian fiction based on a true story, and it just happens to be my story. And in the book, the character is based off of my experience, and her name is Kate Elliott. And she is an adult going back to her hometown in New England, and she's visiting her family, and that's not where she wanted to be. She has been running from that place for over 20 years. And the reason that she's been running away is because she had a very traumatic religious experience growing up in a very strict, independent, fundamental Baptist church, the whole IBF movement there. And although they didn't call themselves that, I will throw that in there. They did not call themselves that, but it was the same. It was controlled by a pastor. We called him the Reverend. And he had every aspect of your life. He controlled it, and he controlled everything that happened in the church. He controlled everything that happened in the school and in the family. And anyone who ever questioned him was church disciplined, and that was considered a crime. It was, you were church disciplined. You were, usually if it was minor, you were given a warning. This is not what we do here. And then usually by the second time, there would be some sort of a church discipline where you would be to be silent in the church, or there was even some that in the story, it does talk about that a little bit more, about one family who had to pay a fine to the church for their crime. And so it just varied on the crime there. So, but in the story, Kate goes back to her hometown, and she does face it. She doesn't want to, but she faces it. And I try to use a lot of fictional elements to draw the reader in. So I use a lot of flashbacks for that. Oh, nice. And during those flashbacks, Kate goes back in time and visits her childhood again. And you see all of these things with her in church and interacting with her family and friends and church members, and even the sermons. And those sermons are real. I have them on cassette tape, and I listened to them again so I could write the story accurately. Wow. And it was hard listening to that voice again. Brings back, it was definitely triggering, brought back a lot of emotion, a lot of pain. And because this pastor destroyed a lot of families. So, but I knew I needed to get the story out, because I knew it could have helped people realize that they're not alone, that there are other people that have been through religious trauma, and that they can heal from it just like I did. So when the story progresses, she does go back into time a second time as she's wrestling with her emotions and wrestling with the idea of forgiveness. Yes.
Yes.
and allowing that to be, and learning how to do
Yeah.
it. What does that even mean? And allowing that healing to take place once that forgiveness has been granted and established and given to yourself, not necessarily for someone
And
else.
some
So
people may not think trauma, right? Trauma in general. I mean, some people might not think a church trauma can be considered grief. But I spoke with a lady around Christmas time. We had an interview where she did talk about her diving into her childhood trauma, her childhood past, and the grief that it brought up, and what that looked like for her. So, how do you feel your past? We're going to get more into your past, but because it's relating to this book, we're talking about the book right now. How do you feel like this
right.
trauma is grief, or is manifesting with grief?
Honestly, it's a couple different ways. I would say the first one is I didn't get out of this church until I was a little older. So once I was gone, I had to reflect on who I
Mm,
was without them. So the grief involved in that is letting go of everything I ever knew.
yeah,
And that included, a lot of that included everybody
yeah,
else too. So, because when you leave that church, if you just say, I'm gone, I can't do
yeah.
this. If you leave without the pastor's permission, that is considered under his guidelines or his rules, unbiblical
Mm-hmm.
reasons. So without his blessing on that, therefore you have left in sin
Mm-hmm.
and you are preached against and cast out of the
Yep,
fellowship.
yep,
So all of a sudden you find yourself very isolated and very
yeah,
alone. And so you grieve on everything that you lost of all that you
yeah.
knew. Thankfully, thankfully I did have my
Mm,
family. Not everybody can say that. Some religions, when that happens, they split up that family. And that is devastating. And I am grateful that I did have my family
mm-hmm.
that did stand by me and started to see the light. And it was a process, but it did take a lot of time. But they left
Yeah.
too eventually,
Now,
and I
I grew up
was
in a very
forced to
similar
leave.
um, church. We did call ourselves Independent Fundamentalist Baptists, and we were very proud of that. Um, and I did not leave until probably 21. It started
Mhm.
happening around 19, but I was like, something's not right here. But
That's all
yeah,
right.
we would go, then we would leave, then we would go, then we would leave. And there was this, but we never actually left. We went to just a different independent fundamentalist Baptist church. But the hold
Mhm.
that it has on the family is you're right. I mean, it can destroy families. It can keep families together where there are not healthy things happening, but things are being kind of shoved under the rug because the father has the authority in the households. So there's a lot of damage that happens in churches like these that are considered, they could be considered fringe, occult kind of. But in my
Right.
experience with talking to people, I have met a lot of women coming out of churches like this, mostly women coming out
Mhm.
of churches like this. There's a lot of people coming out of this church having a lot of church hurt to where they now no
Yes.
longer trust God. So I think your book, I'm so excited for it. And so I'm going to put a link to the book, the Amazon link in the show notes, so people can go find it and
Mhm.
buy it. Because I do think if you're coming out of a situation like this, it's very important for you to see that you're going to say this later on, that you're not alone. And so I really appreciate that. So talking about, so this book is written from your life experiences. So can you share a little bit about what it was like for you? And I think you did a little bit growing up in this church, and how did this kind of
Mhm.
shape your identity?
Well, there was a lot of I didn't know what my identity in that church was, to just be
Mm,
obedient. There was nothing else to be. You be obedient. You do exactly what you're told. Your skirt better touch that floor. You do what the pastor says. You do what your father says. You do what your mother says. You do what the teacher says, and none of them are wrong ever. And the big thing was, you do not question authority.
mhm,
ever. You are always under authority. That is why I titled this book that. And because it is so, that was my identity. I was always under authority. But once you get away from that, once that grief of losing everything you ever knew subsides and you realize, oh, God does love me. God isn't a big good man in the sky with a big stick ready to strike you down at the slightest flaw or the slightest misstep. That's not who God is. And of course, as we grew up in that. So my identity in the church was one thing, but I had to really find myself in my early 20s and find out who I was without them and start that process of forgiveness and hope. Their hope comes before healing. It does, because the hope is something that you didn't have before. You were always one thing and you're taught not to think. So that hope comes first, and then the healing. And then eventually you find that redemption.
So coming out of a church like this, you're saying that hope has to come before healing. There's a lot of talk recently about the deconstruction movement, and I will honestly say I had to. When I came out of this church, I had to deconstruct. I had to get down to the very foundation of what do I believe about God. I had to wipe away everything I was ever taught. And even now, I mean, we're talking 30 years later, I'm still 25 years later. I don't know how old I am. There are still things that have a hold on my religious thinking that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not even in the Bible. Like what? So coming back from that church and that growing up, how did you, and I think I don't really have this question in here, but how did you stay with God, and how did and not abandon the faith when you had to start redefining your foundation and your beliefs and coming out of this church?
Well, I think it started with a lot of questions for God first. Like, God, how could this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? Why is this happening? I've been through a lot. Why is this going on with me? And so there was a lot of talking to God, but deep down I knew I taught myself what grace was. Grace is something that you have not earned. It's freely given. It can be anything. It is freely given. And that is not something that's taught in IBF very much at all. Grace, everything is just rules and regulations. And so once I started having these conversations with God and also giving myself that freedom and permission to show him that the anger that I had, the anger of losing so much, and the anger of what I went through, and I didn't deserve that. I'd been through some other things in my life, and I didn't deserve that either. And why? Why was the biggest question. I think that a lot of people that are grieving through anything always ask why. So as time went on, the verse that became very important to me, and I'll tell you why in a second, was "Be still and know that I am God." And and the reason that became is I got so angry with God one time. I took my Bible. I'm like, I'm just going to read. I'm just going to try. I took it and I hurled it against the wall. I was 20 years old. And there was one day I was at home. I wasn't feeling well, so I was in my room and I'm just sitting down. I just hurled it against the wall, and it fell, of course, on the floor, open. And I let it sit there for a while, and I just let it sit there. Nobody said anything. If they came into my room, brought me something, nobody said anything. Just looked at it and just left it there. Finally, one day, and it sat there a long time. Finally, one day, I went and took a look at it, and it's like it jumped right out in front of me. Be still and know that I am God. And to me, that translated as wait. When you're ready, I will tell you why. And that why is God has a purpose for all of us. And it will look different to everyone. God created us. That means he, number one, loves us very much. He created us in his image. That means to him, we are perfect exactly the way he wants us. And he has a purpose for us. If he didn't, he wouldn't have created us.
That's right.
And that purpose is something that he's not ready to tell us until we're ready to
Yeah.
hear it. And he's working on it for everybody. And I think for everybody, it's just the timing. It's on his
Yeah.
timing. I wasn't ready to hear my purpose
Yeah.
then.
Right. Right.
But it took me until after I was grown up and married and had my own kids, and then had a little bit of time. We ended up having to move to South Carolina. And once I came here, I had the gift of time. And I was quiet in my library, and I suddenly realized my purpose is to tell my story and help
Yeah.
others. That is why I remembered
Yeah.
everything that happened to me. And once I realized God wanted me to do that, it was as if the anger was taken from me.
Oh, that's great.
I have a job to I have a job to do. God wants me to do
Yeah.
this. It was hard, but God truly helped me through those hard
Mm.
parts.
And you talk about how, and might be jumping around on some of those questions here, but when you did leave the church, or when you realized that things were happening, how did you come to realize that this was wrong? We'll go back to that in a second, but you lost everything. So you lost your community, you
Mhm.
lost your friends. I think I don't even know if I said if there's anything else in there, your church community all at once. How did that make you feel? Like, what was going on with you during that time,
Mhm.
that process of leaving?
Leaving was hard because I knew there was going to be
Mm.
repercussions. And there was also going to be repercussions for my parents because they were still trying to work through their things and leaving. I was the first in my family to
Wow. Yeah.
leave. And so and I talk about that in the story, that I was the first and my parents came later. As far as what that felt like, it was very isolating because it was only a matter of time before I'd be preached against and cast out of the fellowship. And there was a few friends that would still talk to me, but they had to be real careful about it and not get caught. So they would sneak me little notes
Wow.
through my brother, who was still going to the Christian school there at the time, that he would bring me home a note or two because we didn't have cell phones yet. So that's how we communicated. So we had that, and that was I had one or two friends left there, and that was honestly, that was wonderful that I had that. I was grateful for that. But as far as learning, I just had to learn who I was without that church, and just know in my heart that I was doing the right
Yeah.
thing, and that I truly believed God loved me and had that purpose for me. So that really helped me stay
Yeah.
strong and move forward away from the
Yeah.
isolation and the hurt from it. And yeah, sometimes it does
Yeah.
still sting. And sometimes you can go into a church or meet another Christian somewhere, and they make a comment, or maybe there's an old hymn sometimes that I really can't stand that I hear, and I'm just reminded because it was just ingrained, and I hated the song. And so today, sometimes in church, if it's played, I really don't even like singing that one, just because it brings up a lot of hurt
Yep.
for me. So there are reminders, there are triggers, and I just try to face
Yeah.
them and say, I see you. But I'm a child of
Hmm.
God,
Hmm.
and
So,
He loves me and has saved me.
when we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but we talked about how, you when you left the church, you lost everything. There's this initial grief. And this is twofold. Was there an initial shunning? Like, did some people turn their backs on you? You did share that some people were still connected with you. And then did you have any more experiences, even years down the road, of people still not accepting you or shunning you because you left the church?
Absolutely. The first answer to the first question is an absolute yes. And I felt terrible at the time that my parents probably received more of the brunt of
Mm.
that than me because I was the first to
Yeah.
leave. So there was comments to made to my father, get your household in order, things like that. That my father would, and he had took his deacon position away
Oh,
from
wow.
him. Things
Yeah.
things like that would happen, and then my mother would speak out to some ladies, and I said, "Oh, we need to pray for you." And so my mother started getting a little fed up with some comments too, and then she made a comment. She was church disciplined for making a comment, and things escalated from there. And that's, they knew that, so they received more of the brunt of that because I was their
Yeah.
child. But as far as down the road, um, there are some former members that have learned what I have written
Mm.
about. And in the book, I have been very careful to change the
Right.
names of everybody. And because I am protecting people who are in much more a state of
Mm.
hurt and who have been through
Mhm.
enough. And so I am protecting some of those identities. So I did change their names. I've changed the places and the locations, and some of the even as far as like, that's why I'm calling it Christian fiction based on a true
Right.
story, because I wanted to change one circumstance and the backstory was not provided to
Yeah.
me. So there were a few fictional elements there where I needed to provide that
Mhm.
backstory. But as far as the hurt that was involved, some of those people did find out. The other, not those people, but there were others in that church that have found out that I have written a story. And I told one who was a friend, a family friend of ours, and we did things with their family. We even attended the same church. But as soon as they found out what I had written, they immediately shunned us. And I felt terrible for my husband. He'd never been through
Mm.
anything like this
Right.
before.
Right.
And I just said, I'm so sorry. You've just had your first shunning. And he just stared
Yeah.
at me like, this feels
Yeah.
awful. I said, no. And my heart broke for him because I'd been through it. I know what it
Yeah.
feels like, but he did
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. That's
So
rough.
that was very, very
Ugh.
hurtful. And we never know. They'll never speak to us
Yeah.
again. And then I was also judged unfairly by an old classmate from high school. Of course, we're all adults
Mhm.
now, who got wind of my book through someone else. And they said, well, the book is really about this. I imagine it's about this. And unfortunately, it was not. And he had never read the book. And he said that publicly on social media. And that was
Yep.
hurtful. So there are things that can
Of
happen
course.
there. But I also know that my story has helped other
Yeah.
people. Some of them have been in the church, some of them I have never
Yeah.
met. And I know that it has helped people. And I know that's why God wanted me to tell the
So,
story.
having grown up in the same cultish religious church, I have
Yes.
some of the same
Uh-huh.
experiences you have. My husband didn't believe me, thought I was exaggerating until he met some of my friends, and he was like, well, you were not exaggerating. I was like, no, I wasn't. But some of my friends from college especially, when they came to the realization, of, hey, this isn't right, these are lies, this is a betrayal of what God had established and wants for us, some of us, myself included, kind of leaned into God, and others completely left the faith. Like,
Mhm.
not even atheists, because they hate God so much now. So they acknowledge there's a God, but they hate him. So how did you, coming out of this church, out of this experience, what, I guess maybe what was it that you did, or how did you learn to trust God again so that you can continue in fellowship with him and walking with him, instead of, just completely leaving the faith and doing your own thing?
Well, like I said before, as at first I had some
Mhm.
anger. Like I was questioning God a lot, and God slowly showed me, just wait. I am still here for you. And also, what did help me is I did surround myself, but I did learn to make other
Mhm.
friendships with
Mhm.
other people who did help me. And once I was out of home and in college, that was a huge help where I was able to do that and also get a different experience in a different church. And there was one, also, believe it or not, the college that I went to at the time, they did the president of the college called me into his office and wanted to talk to me and said, because his daughter, or the reverend's daughter, also went to college with me at the same college. So it was a Christian college. And so the president said, I want to talk to you. And I'm like, oh boy, what did I do? And he said, this pastor has been making some phone calls to me. You grew up in this church and I want to know what's going on. And I said, what would you like to know? And he just said, why is he doing this? Why is this happening? Why is he calling me and questioning me on this or that? And what's going on here? And that also validated for me that even he thinks it's not right. And he knew.
Yeah.
So I surrounded myself with, and I was able to talk to him. I was able to talk to the dean of women at the time who helped me through some things. And I was able to speak with her. And I think that finding that support, finding therapy, learning to trust yourself again, learning to trust others, and learning to trust that God did not abandon you. Just because something happened to you, God has not abandoned you. Not. He's just trying to give you that space. He's there for you. He wants you to heal.
Thank you so much for joining us for this half of Kimalee's interview. I'm very excited to share the second half of her interview next week. We're trying something new on the Grieving with God podcast, where I realized that sitting down to listen to a whole hour, sometimes longer, interview is really hard. So every week, I'm trying to keep our episodes to around 25 to 30 minutes. Let me know in the comments if this is something that interests you, if this is something that works for you, or if you would rather have the one big, long interview all cohesive and together. I look forward to what we have coming up on the Grieving with God podcast this year, including a virtual retreat coming this summer. In July, I'm hoping to gather a bunch of women speakers and have worship time and breakout groups where we can chat and talk about what it means to grieve with God. And the goal of this virtual retreat is really to learn how to get rest and respite in the Lord when we are going through really hard and tough times. And honestly, this year has been really hard and really tough for a lot of us already. So join us again next week for the second half of Kimalee Finelli's interview about her book, Under Authority.